Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Naomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. In today's episode, we're going to do a recap on my interview with David Watson. Now, David is a specialist in neuroscience leadership. He also has a business called Neuro Lead, where he actually coaches and helps people to better understand that neuroscience leadership based theory. And it was great having a chat with him. I mean, if you look at neuroscience leadership, it's basically understanding how the brain works. And a lot of the times we are, I suppose, at the mercy of the processing within our brain. And some of that is connected to subconscious programming, and some of it is just the way that the brain is actually designed within itself to respond to different things, and things like keeping us safe, things like moving towards pleasure and away from pain, and all of those survival instincts that come from the brain in that neuroscience space. So David and I had a great chat. I really enjoyed speaking with him. For those of you who know, I've actually done a psychology degree and I'm in my last unit of my Masters of Business Psychology. So this stuff is really not just fascinating to me, but I love it. I love learning about it. I love implementing it, and I love sharing it with other people. And I think that's probably why we connected so well. And, David even spoke about, when we find something that connects and that we're passionate about, we kind of want to share it with everyone around us. And, we want to tell the world, but when the world doesn't pick it up the way that we do, sometimes we can question, like, have we done it wrong? Are we delivering it wrong? How can I connect with these people better? But sometimes it's just down to the person not really being ready to have and receive what we want to share with them. And that's okay. And for me, this has been really important in leadership, in my therapy space, and also in life. Because the better you get at this sort of stuff and the more that you do it, the more you can pick up on those subtle things that give you an indication of what's going on within someone. And it's something I'm really good at, but there's some people that don't want to hear what's going on. Another good example of this is, the last year for me has been a lot of unplanned and unwanted change. And there was one point where I was really triggered by it all emotionally. And I was seeing a friend of mine, and she started listing off all the things I could do to get myself out of that little rut. And I kind of looked at her and said, I know what I need to do. I just don't want to. Like, I need to sit right here and I need to feel this emotion and I need to become curious about it and see what it's here to teach me. And so I have another psychologist friend. He's a friend, but he was also my therapist. So as I was studying my psychology degree, I went and saw a therapist for many years because I didn't want to be trying to heal myself through my clients, which I've heard some horror stories from people, right, that have been to therapists that have sat there and walked out and thought, I just gave them more therapy than I got. So, yeah, I spent a fair bit of time with him working through some of the stuff that I had gone through in my childhood and early adulthood, and some of those experiences, and trying to understand them better and for me to heal. And when I first started doing my RTT, I caught up with him for a coffee and I said, oh, there's this one person I know could really benefit. And I've had a chat with them and they just want to do talk therapy. They don't want to do the RTT. I really think it's going to be beneficial, but they're not open to it. And he said to me, he said, Naomi, a lot of the healing comes from the suffering. And that really connected with me. And I think that's the same sometimes in leadership, right? It's not till we get to a point where we've exhausted everything and we're at a point where we don't know what else to do that we will then become more open-minded and curious. And we'll then start exploring other bits and pieces so that we can learn more. So over time, we realize that not everything is for everyone, and that's okay. And that's the next level up of either being a therapist or being a leader, is recognizing that there's so many people at all different stages. And the stage that they're at, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the stage they're at. That's the place that life has brought them to. And they have a different way of receiving things, learning things, and experiencing things to possibly others around them. And good leadership is being able to identify that and adapt to it. And I've seen many leaders over my career that have one leadership style, and if people don't fit it, there's something wrong with them. Whereas realistically, if people don't fit it, then we adapt and we adjust as leaders. And if we can't, then I hate to say it, but I think there's something wrong with us. But, changing someone's life, even with just one nugget, just fuels our ability to give back. So if there's any other carer archetypes out there, you will know that being able to give to someone, share to someone, and watch someone have an aha moment is just gold. It really does fuel you to continue doing the work. Now, when David and I spoke, he gave us his definition of leadership, and that was understanding and leading self to lead others. And I thought this was really great because, when we become leaders, if we go through the traditional learning mechanisms, do our Cert 4 in leadership and management or our diploma in that, or even, a bachelor's degree in management, it is all focused around what you can do as a leader, different theories, different applicabilities, different tools and techniques. But it's actually understanding who we are and being able to lead ourselves that is the biggest influence on leading others. People see us creating a space where we're learning and we're growing, and they want to jump on that train. They trust us because they know that our minds are open and we have curiosity, and we're all about trying to do things in the best way possible. So we'll be flexible. We will listen to them and we will learn from them. And that's a really important thing. Now, even when we have all the tools in our toolkit, or we think we do, right? Because I don't think we ever always have them, but when we have a broad range of them, right? It can be really challenging to be able to communicate with these different people in different ways. But we need to be careful to not scare them, not scare them off, and tame our passion for helping people so that we're not putting people in a position where they feel inferior or they feel inadequate. It's pretty tricky because once you see and have passion, it's hard to unsee the things in other people, and it is difficult to turn off. Excuse me. So the next step for us is learning what to share, when to share it, and when to hold it back. And David and I both spoke about similar experiences in that space, and that requires some intense self-regulation, right? To be able to hold back your motivation, your passion, and your knowledge is really sounds probably easy, but it's a lot of self-regulation that you need to go into, and it's a lot of self-reflection as well. And not everyone's capable of doing that, but that's a critical part of leadership, because having, that lack of understanding of the true version of ourselves really impacts our ability to lead others. So, David and I also talk about diversity, and diversity being the key to success, and how that affects our behaviors, our communication, our thinking, by who else we have around us, right? Having great think tanks of different people with different knowledge and perspectives that can be shared. Having teams and groups that are sharing these different behaviors, communication, and thinking so that we can actually grow and learn more and become more curious. And diversity introduces that interpersonal risk, right? And unproductive conflict that when we don't understand someone else's motivators and stresses, then that's another time that we can dig deeper, right? We can go within a little bit more so that we can serve again without. And peeling back those layers of self and understanding those components relating to leadership is really important. We talked also about communication and natural thinking processes, and this is where we started diving a little bit deeper into that neuroscience and knowing that if others think differently, lean into that. Don't push it down, don't push it away, don't disregard them. Like, really lean into that different thinking and become curious about it, learn from it, grow from it, and adapt to it as well. They're all really key things to be able to do. Now, I often talk about curiosity. I think that for me, that is my biggest healer. That is my biggest pusher. That is my biggest learning tool that I have, is to go into a place of curiosity. It also is great for my emotional regulation and my EQ. It's also great for the study that I do, my parenting, navigating relationships, all those sorts of things. When I lead from a place of curiosity, I'm neither thinking I know it all, and I'm neither naive to everything either. I'm curious, I'm open to learning, I'm asking different questions that encourage learning. And so curiosity is shifting from, I wonder why I do this, to I wonder why they do this when you're looking in the leadership space. Right? Why are they behaving in that particular way, instead of just putting them down as being a troublemaker or being annoying or not jumping on the train? Why aren't they jumping on the train? Is there something that I could do differently? Is there something I could do better? Excuse me. So many leaders within the leadership realm lead by their ego, right? And they measure their team against their expectations of self. Your team is never going to meet those expectations you have of yourself, and you're never going to meet those expectations you have of yourself, right? Because we always have expectations that exceed our own abilities. And that's a good thing, because it pushes us and it keeps us driven. But when we're actually putting and measuring others against that, it's not a good thing. So understanding that we need to set up a different way of viewing our team members. And, David spoke about changing it from, why doesn't my team listen? Why doesn't my team follow the plan? Why doesn't my team understand how to deliver the value I need? And change that up to, how can I get the team to listen and follow the plan? How can I get the team to understand, and how can I get them to deliver the value I need? And when we shift that and we go into that curious space, we're pushing aside the ego, and we're actually looking at how we can grow and develop and connect better and can communicate stronger with them. So many things that we had, just looking through some notes here. So if leaders have courage to better themselves, we need to celebrate showing up. Excuse me again. So as leaders, and encouraging those around us to be leaders, if they have that courage to step forward and sign up for different training programs or step into a place of therapy, therapy isn't just because we're suffering from mental health issues, right? That's the way, however, it has been tarnished and packaged in the past. But therapy, in all sorts of different shapes and forms, is about becoming better. It's about improving things about us. And we don't need to have mental health illnesses or mental health conditions or be strained in the area of mental health to be able to want to better ourselves. So therapy is just approaching someone else that sees things as an observer and can see from the outside looking in, rather than being stuck in the mud of what's going on. And they're able to come up with different ways of thinking and viewing problems and scenarios around us. So those that have the courage to better themselves through all these different things, as I said, therapy, training, development, challenging their own status quo, standing outside of their comfort zone, they need to celebrate. We need to celebrate them. Excuse me, we need to celebrate them showing up. Now, in the training that David does, he does a lot of training around that neuroscience leadership. In the training that I do with the Ripple Effect, which is that leadership psychology program, there's some people that just want to do a leadership course and just go, yep, tick a box. We can put it down as a control now for some of the risks that we had around leadership, and off we go. But David does things a little bit different. He actually asks them, are you just here to tick a box? Because for him, it's not about ticking that box, right? There's always growth to be had. And even I've noticed that when I've done training delivery, either in person or online, there's some people you can see are in the room and are like, I'm just here because I have to come in here. But they always learn something, right? Because that's what we're here to do as humans. We're here to learn, we're here to grow, when we're here to evolve. So when David does do his training or when he's engaging with people, he leans on the power of storytelling. And for him, it's about how he can bring that to life and how that lands with the other people in the room and how that connects with them and creates a space where they become curious and open to learning. We also talked about the ego. Now, I've already mentioned that once in saying that people are led by their ego. That can be a tricky part to follow, but it's okay for us to have an ego, right? And our ego will naturally want to get in the way. But if we start becoming curious of that rather than acting on it, we can shift that whole space. And I know with myself, I spent most of my life being driven by my ego, and I made some probably poor behavioral choices because of that. Some of the things that I've done and said to people over my life are things that I'm not overly proud of. But they were in spaces where I was driven by ego. Now, getting to a place though where you can recognize that, where you can go within and explore that and see where it comes up, that then allows us to use the ego when it's needed rather than being driven by the ego when it wants to pop up. And, I had a client that came in for an RTT session and they came in and they said, oh, I want to be able to switch off my ego and I want to be able to stop, I want to turn my ego off. And we had that exact same conversation. I said, well, it's not good to turn your ego off because that's the human part of us, right? That's the part that is there that wants to be human. If we didn't have egos and we didn't have these human parts, we'd all just want to be meditating on a mountain, right? And getting and reaching full enlightenment because why else would we want to do anything? There would be no drive to be better at this tomorrow than I am today. There'd be no glory in improving our relationships or succeeding in the corporate space or whatever it is that we're driven to do. But what we can do is we can say, right, okay, well, the ego's there and it is helpful, right? My ego, as much as there's some bad decisions and bad behaviors I exhibited, there's a lot of good ones too. And if it wasn't for my ego, I wouldn't have had the career I had. I probably wouldn't even be doing this podcast right now because it really did serve me in some positive ways. But it was when I was able to recognize it and go, you know what? You're handy here. I'm going to pull you out of my pocket and use you here. But over here, you're not so helpful. You need to step back. And moving into a space where you're better able to control that is where we're able to level up. And as I said, become curious. Ego, why do you need to be here right now? Why is it so important for you to say that thing to that person or showcase that behavior? Is that because it's in the best interest of everyone and it's going to lead to a great outcome? Or is that because you're feeling threatened or intimidated right now? Or is that because you need to be in control and you have to showcase that power? Or is that because of this or that or many other things? And it's a really great space to become curious about. It also allows us when we're able to work with our ego and pull it out when it needs to be. It gives us that opportunity to see people how they are rather than how we want them to be. So before we mentioned about, getting curious about how I'm influencing, well, as a leader, how I'm influencing how they're feeling, behaving, and how they're acting, rather than just seeing them as, oh, they're chicken head, because we don't get along and they don't listen to me. Yeah, okay, but you're the leader. So how can you make that happen? Seeing that they're just a person and maybe they've had other leaders with a similar style to that and they've got some triggers that are associated with that. Okay, let's adapt. Maybe they're a rebel archetype and they're always breaking the rules. Okay, let's go in and become curious about that. and help them adapt. So it's being able to see that we have so many tools in our toolkit and use those tools rather than being driven by them. Anger is another thing, right? Anger, when people are overwhelmed with anger and are driven by the anger, they do some things and say some things that aren't real cool. But when we're able to get into a place where we're managing our emotions a lot better, and this can be done through, the work I do or the work that David does, especially around the neuroscience, when you can recognize why anger is coming up within you, then you can work on those triggers. And then you can actually go, well, I'm not going to allow anger to control me, but right now it'd be very helpful for me to show anger because it's a tool right now to get people's attention or to get these people to recognize that this is important or whatever it is. But it's unhelpful when we're driven by that anger, because then we're not in control of what we think and what we feel and what we do. So David and I had a big chat, really big chat. So let's keep going through these notes. We also spoke about values. And he asks people, does your team know the company values? And I've asked that same question many times, and very rarely do I get a yes when I'm in the room. And I don't say it to shame people, and I make it clear this isn't a shaming exercise. But if your team don't know the company values, then how are they meant to be able to work within those values and align with those values? And, there are some companies that just have picked out values to just put on their website. Fine. But I worked with a local company a couple of weeks ago where we actually did like a team building event with their team. And then we sat down and we pulled out what their personal values were and how they connected to their jobs and their business, which naturally evolved into coming up with some company values, which everyone really connected with. And when the people are invested in those values, then it's going to be more natural for them to exhibit them. When they're talking with clients, when they're executing the work, when they're following up even with bad debtors, right? All of those sorts of things, you come from a particular personality or a particular perspective. But when you're aligned with the overall vision, because of the values you hold, then you're able to get to that vision with a lot more ease. As David said, they help people to work in a way that achieves the mission and the vision, and it aligns behaviors to an acceptable space that meets the values and the expectations. Love that. That's absolutely perfect. Now, when we were talking before about some of those automatic responses, David and I went into a bit deeper there. And one of the ones that I hear when people are talking about that neuroscience space, or they're talking about how the brain naturally reacts to different things, is the amygdala hijack. And in the work that I do, I believe that the amygdala hijack is real. Yes, 100% definitely real. But I think people are using it as an excuse. I think people then are able to give that a label and go, oh, I said those things and I had those emotions because of my amygdala hijack. It wasn't me. It was just that. And they stand behind it and they hide behind it. But it only exists when you allow it to exist, right?
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Naomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Naomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
Fair enough. I don't know what I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And before you're aware that it's there and that it's happening, granted, it is going to have control. But once you actually do know that it's there, and once you do have an awareness of it, then if it's controlling you, it's because you're allowing it to control you, because You, like David said, you can feel it starting to take place. You can feel the way your body changes. You can feel how the different chemicals are coming out of the brain and what it's stirring up. And you have the ability to be empowered to catch that before it actually takes off and before it actually becomes a problem. And as David said, it's is really important though to have that language to lean on first. So knowing and learning about the amygdala hijack is great because that gives you the language. You can then sit in that and go, oh, I can feel an amygdala hijack coming on. What am I going to do now? So once you have the language to lean on, David then speaks about understanding the feelings and understanding what feelings it's going to generate. He also says we're able to observe what is happening. We can label that, and then we can regulate it. And, when we're at the mercy of emotions and we're responding in a way that is driven by the amygdala hijack or driven by a high emotional response, that's when we do things that lead to shame and guilt and regret. And even though as leaders, it's okay to slip up from time to time, it's okay to own that and apologize with that. We don't want to do that all the time. Right. So, we do dumb stuff. And what happens an hour after the cortisol goes through the body? Well, then we realize it's a bad decision. And this is the information David shared around that neuroscience, right? Once the cortisol and the amygdala has gone and done its job, we realize that the behavior was not aligned with our values and our goals. And as I'm saying this, and the people that listen to that interview will know 90% of people know exactly what that feels like. Like, oh, shouldn't have said that. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I had a client the other day that reached in for some talk therapy that was like, oh, I resigned the other day in anger. I don't know what to do. Right. And it's because they're in that space that they actually just reacted rather than responding. So, so this is where training comes in, right? Because as I said before, we don't know what we don't know. And so in order to learn more and become curious about these things, then the first step really is to do some training. And there are so many training offers out there. It's just insane. You've got your formal ones through the tertiary system or the TAFE and VET systems. Or you can do different ones that still have different accreditations, but are more aligned with this deep aspect of being a leader. And, that's some of the training that David does deliver and offers. And he speaks about training in leadership, not because you're a bad leader, right? That anyone that's going to, sometimes, granted, there's incidents that happen and it's identified that the leadership's lacking, or I work with companies with workplace psychological safety, and when we do our risk assessment, we can pick up that there is a lacking of leadership training. So yeah, look, leadership and training in leadership can happen because there's poor leadership, but doesn't mean you're a bad leader, right? Training isn't an intervention majority of the time. And even if it is identified as something that's kind of, there's some skill sets that need improving, still doesn't mean it's an intervention, right? The whole idea and concept is for improvement. And if you look at major sports players, they're training and training every week, not because they're bad at what they do, but because they want to keep their skills on track. It's because they want to improve in that skill set. Right? So this training that we do in the leadership space is about leveling up and becoming better at what you do. There's no limits to improvement and betterment. And so choosing to do something regularly is really important. And if you look at a lot of associations, right, and memberships that people join up to, there's actually a requirement for the CPD hours, right? So continued personal development. So to uphold your membership in a lot of these spaces, you have to provide evidence of a minimum of X amount of CBD hours in a year. So CBD, no, CPD. CBD is not the right one. Definitely not the right one. But, so all I'm trying to say here is that if someone suggests for you to do a training program, or if you think yourself, hey, I might want to train, don't stop doing that because you feel like it's a weak thing to do, or you feel like it is identifying that you've got something you lack, because really it's identifying that you're actually wanting to improve on what you have. In our conversation, the subconscious mind popped up, which is great because that's my specialty. And we spoke about 95% of what you do, think, and feel is automatically generated through the subconscious. And it gives the illusion that we have control, but we don't. We don't have control over some of the things that we do unless we create awareness around it. And we think we do, and then we blame all sorts of things. Oh, I lost my temper because of them, or because of that situation, or because I've been struggling for this and no one's given me answers, or because I don't have the resources. No, you lost that. You were in a space of losing control over that, or losing your crap over it and getting emotional, because that's the way you're subconsciously wired. And without being able to change some of the ways you think, then that's not going to change. So what that means, though, is most of this is done by the subconscious, if 95% of how we think and feel and behave is actually generated without us actually realizing, then we don't need to be at the mercy of that. We can now create awareness around that. Remember, I said before, you don't know what you don't know, but now you do know. We can start observing the way that we think and feel and behave. And we can start observing how that's affecting our relationships and how that's affecting us and our progress. And we can recognize then what things we can do, and we can see it in others, and then we can start helping them through the process. And that's leadership. That's looking within and going, okay, I can improve on this and this and this, and creating ourselves in strength. And then when we look at our people and our teams around us, we can then identify and say, hey, I think they could be really good at this if they're given more instruction on how, or if they're helped through this different situation to be able to go within more, or if they're taught about this emotional impact and in EQ, if they're explained about priming and how that sets up the brain, and the biases that we have, and whatever else the topics on leadership are. And then we don't need to be at the mercy of how we're feeling and how we're acting. We can actually take more control over our lives, because, as I say many times, there's only 3 things we can control, and that is how we feel, how we think, and how we behave. But until we recognize that, and we're actually given the tools to be able to recognize and act on that, then it can be pretty tricky, and we can go into that place of shame and guilt. So when I was speaking with David, again, we did say it's okay to make a mistake, right? It's okay to slip up. As leaders, we still got to remember we are human. There's no metal under here. It's blood and bone and muscle, right? But it's about being in control of ourselves most of the time. But if we do slip up, it's about owning that, apologizing for it, and then just trying to put tools into place to make sure we do things better next time. So some of the other neuroscience-y stuff that we came up with is the brain is constantly seeking reward to keep us alive, but we don't always need it, right? So having that awareness, again, is having awareness that it's happening. And David used a great example about peanut butter toast, and how when he smells that, his brain goes, and pushes him to have somebody. He sits back and goes, do I really need it right now? Is that what I really want to have? And so there's so many other little things as well. And this is what we were sort of mentioning, that once we know it, you know it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's why this level of training is really helpful for leaders that are wanting to level up, because it's not your general, oh, you need to have time management. It's probably more about, why don't you have good time management? What's going on in your brain when this is happening? Why are you avoiding those tasks? And very similar with what I talk about in the ripple effect. The ripple effect is not about what you need to do to become a good leader. It's about who you need to become. So it's actually understanding self a little bit more and the way that the brain works. So mine is more from a subconscious perspective and the automatic processes within the brain, which is not dissimilar to the stuff that David does, but David does it with a lot more of that neuroscience talk and sort of those sort of perspectives is the angle he comes from. But they both have the same results. So a couple of other things we talked about. We also talked about if you're going to be a true people leader, then you need to get comfortable being lonely. One of the major mistakes that I see in leadership is people trying to be friends with their work teams. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but I am saying it's not effective. And if you are friends with your work teams and you're happy with that, then I'm not here to change your mind. But what I am here to say to you is when you are too familiar to the people that are in your team, then they don't have that same respect for you. I don't care how much they say they do. They respect you as a friend, not as a leader. And that's a totally different way of motivating someone and getting someone to perform at their best. It's a lot easier to say no to a friend than it is to someone that you respect and look up to, right? You're going to push yourself and push your boundaries more when you by someone that actually can see more potential for you than someone that's your mate. You'll also do things that others don't like, right? You'll make decisions that other people don't like, and you'll bring in different policies possibly that other people don't like. You may take on work and jobs that other people don't like, or allocate team members to tasks that they don't like. Now, if that's your friend, they're going to get pretty upset with you, and it's going to affect that relationship. If you're a leader, they may still get upset with you, but they'll suck it up a lot better. And I think the thing about a true people leader is they know the end game, right? The end game needs us to do what needs to be done to get the best out of those around us. And it's not about sacrificing people, or it's not about throwing them under the bus. It's about really understanding who they are and what motivates them so that we can put them in the best position to get the best out of them and also provide the best results for the company or for the team. So you can't be friends with them, but you do need to understand what makes them tick, right, in order to be able to support them well. And by understanding neuroscience, you can sometimes be able to pick why they're thinking, feeling, and behaving the way they do. In the program that I deliver, the Ripple Effect, we talk about the different archetypes that might come through, the different core needs that every human needs. And when we go through and the 5 love languages, and we review all of these to see why different people might behave in different ways. But ultimately, it comes from that subconscious programming. And so once you can understand some of these and you get the training in them and you immerse yourself, then you start seeing it a lot easier. You're like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then what do? You become curious, right? That's the element and that's the key. So David and I also spoke about challenging self, why that's important, leaning into uncomfortable situations. We need to retrain our brain. From the moment we're born, our brain is always retraining. And there's a thing called neuroplasticity, that most people have heard of, but may not be fully aware of how that works, right? So our brain is wired in a particular way and has different synapses that backs up some of the ways we think, feel, and behave. And what we need to do is we need to retrain some of those automatic responses. And once we retrain them, the more we actually sit in there and repeat those things, the more those they will wire together. So the neurons and pathways that fire together will wire together. And being in uncomfortable situations is gold, because after a while, something that was uncomfortable then becomes comfortable, and the brain becomes more familiar with that and wires that through. So if you can go through it and survive, then it resets the survival threshold. And this is what David was telling us. I don't even know where I got the name Peter. This is where David was telling us it resets that survival threshold. So it gives us more resilience. So we've had this huge event that's happened in our lives, really challenged us. The next time we have a huge event, even if it feels like it's overwhelming, it's not challenging us as much. Or the actual event has leveled up, which makes us feel like we're being challenged at the same level. But each time we got more resilience because those pathways are rewiring. David also spoke about wherever there is success, there has to be discomfort. Things are meant, success comes from growth, and growth, majority of the time, comes from discomfort. So that goes back into as well that saying that I heard, what we work on in private creates how we show up in public. And you don't think that Serena Williams or Kobe Bryant or any of these big, huge sports players just wake up in the morning and go out and play a game and play magnificently. No, they're practicing. They're getting coached. They've got coaches that help get them through and point out different ways they could be doing things and observing them and coming up with strategies. And they're showing up all the time in that private space. And it's uncomfortable. It's not real great. That's how they get to the point where they show up in public. Look at Stephen Bradbury, right? That won the gold medal. Everyone fell over in front of him and he came through and he won the gold. And people were saying, oh, he didn't deserve that. It was just circumstance. But crikey, I don't know if you've ever been in training to make the team for the Olympics. You don't just wake up and go, oh, I'm going to go to the Olympics. Oh, now I was coming last and I won gold. Yay. There's a lot of work that happens in that private space that gets you to a level where you're selected for an Olympic team. And as far as I'm concerned, that guy deserved that. The one that stayed upright on the day was the best skater of the day. And he deserved every second of that glory he got when he won gold. And it was purely because of that work that he put in to get there. So David did use a couple of sports analogies, and he did say leadership, unlike sport, is something that we don't get to practice. Right? We don't get to practice leadership until we're right in the middle of the game. So when it all hits the fan is when we're there being a leader and we're like, oh, am I getting this right? I've just got to make my best guess. I've got to make a decision here, and so it's important to continue honing those skills. Right. Doing the training, getting yourself a coach, getting into a mentor program, all of those things are really important because if you do leadership wrong, you can have an impact on someone's soul that can affect the rest of their lives and the lives of others around them. Right. Unlike sport, you just show up to sport. If you play golf, you have a bad game of golf, you have a bad game of golf. But if you have a bad day in the leadership chair and you say the wrong thing to the wrong person or the wrong thing to any person, that can impact them. And then that ripples out into their family and into the community, right? And it can affect their parenting and the way they raise and engage with their children and their relationship with their partner and their parents and their siblings and their friends. And so it's a really big responsibility being a leader. And I think it's something that people don't tend to really look at and take on board. In some of the industries I've worked and consulted in, people are wanting to go into a leadership role because they want more money, right? It's not because they want to help grow people and they're inspired to be better and create change and enhance the lives of others. No, I want more money. How do I get more money? Oh, become a supervisor. Oh, yeah, put my name down for that. Right. But that isn't the way we should be looking at it because, have you ever, I suppose with me, I had this one leader and I mentioned this in the podcast interview. His name was Ron James. If anyone knows Ron James, please connect me with him. He was the superintendent out at Worsley Alumina when I was there, which is now South 32. And he was in the purchasing department. And I was only 19 when I worked up there. And I didn't do ATAR in high school because it was a bit too hard and I was into having a good time. And I didn't really expect that I was going to be going to uni. So I ended up applying for a TAFE course and I only needed year 10 to get in. So I was, still went to year 12, but I didn't really need those grades. So I was having a fat time. Anyway, he convinced me to go, and at that time it was called a STAT exam, which was a mature age tertiary entrance exam. And I rocked up there. I'd had a big night the night before, and so I purposely did that. I realized now to self-sabotage. So when I failed this test, because that's what I thought I was going to do, then I had a really good reason, right? It wasn't because I wasn't capable. It was because I was hungover, had a big night the night before. Um, Surprisingly to myself, I did quite well on this test. And I went into him and I said, "Oh, I passed the test." And he helped guide me through, I think my first degree, I signed up for, I think I was going to do business law because that aligned with the purchasing element, and Worsley supported or Worsley Illuma at the time supported tertiary study. So they gave us financial support if we were enrolled in that space. So, but it had to align with the business. So, yeah, I never ever would have done any further study if it hadn't have been for that man. And he saw something in me that I didn't see. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional talking about this. And that just changed the trajectory of my whole life. I ended up going and finishing not one, but two undergraduate degrees, currently doing my master's, and I've just submitted an application for a PhD. So I'm not sure if I'll get accepted for that, but and that has allowed me to motivate and inspire so many people. I've had different work colleagues go and actually do extra study because they saw me doing it and they believed it was possible for them. I'm showing my children that it's never too old to keep bettering yourself and keep improving. Um, I've, showed many people around me as well from, the group that I hung around with when I was in high school that anything is possible if we set our mind to it. And so that one man changed my life, changed my kids' lives, changed the lives of most of the teams that have now worked with me, purely because he saw something in me and he pushed it. Now, as David said, though, let's flip that. What happens if he was a complete chicken head and his impact on me had been the same intensity, but from a negative aspect? And so I hated going to work and I hated growing and I hated working with people and I hated myself because he made me feel so inadequate and so little. Can you imagine the effect that that would have now on my kids and on my family and on the people that have worked within my teams? Be completely different. And we don't know. I'm sure maybe Ron does know. He's freaking awesome. I don't know. But I'm sure Ron has no idea of what those couple of conversations with me has created for me. Just like I'm sure that if we turn up as poor leaders and we don't actually move into a space where we're improving ourselves, that our impact on someone we will never know could actually create some major negative aspects in their lives and the lives of others. So this is why it's really important, right? Like I said before, and like David said, going and getting training and growth in this leadership space isn't because we're inadequate. It's about improving what we've already got. It's not because we're missing something. Just going back again to curiosity, ask great questions, know your team, treat them how they need to be treated. If you're having a bad day, recognize that and don't put yourself in front of other team members. If you're being triggered by things, become curious, find out why within yourself. If your team aren't behaving in the way that you're expecting them to, become curious about why you expect them to in the first place and what you can do to drive them better and connect with them better and really inspire them better. And so as I sign off on this episode, it was a pretty it might got a little bit emotional there. Sorry about that. But as David said, you can make all the excuses in the world for your leadership, but that doesn't turn on or off the impact that you have on the lives of others as a leader. So we should have this overarching desire to have a positive impact on the world, because we have the potential to do that if we make the right choices in our leadership space. So look, have a listen to the interview between David and myself. It was great. In that episode, you'll see in the show notes how you can reach out to him, learn more about this neuroscience leadership, even just connect with him for a conversation. He's mint. Hey, he's really great to talk to. You can also, jump on my website, getupandgrowconsulting.com.au if you want to learn more about the ripple effect, or you can reach out to me, flick me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a chat with you there, and I can deliver that in person, or you can jump on the online training course for that. But and if that neither of those are for you, to look for something else. Don't make excuses as to why you shouldn't be improving. Look for things you can do. Find audiobooks, find, podcasts like this one. Just I feel like every leader should recognize their social responsibility to continually improve themselves, because that is then going to lead to a better workplace, a better environment, and a better world overall. So thanks for tuning in. It was great chatting with you. I think I went a little bit longer in this episode, but it's because I was so passionate about it. So please forgive me for that. And I look forward to serving you again in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe, and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.